listening to the Straight to Video podcast with Rob Lane.
What's going on? Thanks again for choosing to listen to the Straight to Video podcast. Hope things are all going great for everyone out there. On today's show, I had a lot of fun talking to UK guitarist Myke Gray. If you've been a hard rock fan for some time, you will no doubt be familiar with Myke's career, either going right back to the late 80s, early 1990s when he was performing as part of Jagged Edge, or perhaps you're a fan of the band Skin, which Myke formed a few years later and managed to achieve great UK success even in the wake of the changing musical climate of the time, with top 40 UK chart hits, appearances on Top of the Pops, and also a show-stealing performance at the Donington Monsters of Rock Festival in 1994. Was you at that one? I was at that one. That was a great day. After some time away from the music scene when he became a highly successful personal trainer and health aficionado, Myke returned to music with his Red, White and Blues band, and bringing things right up to date, he's getting set to release his new Shades of Grey project. This guy is like a well-oiled machine with anything he sets his mind to, and if I'm being honest, I really wasn't expecting Myke's story to be what it is. From an outsider, I simply thought that Myke was a talented guitarist, which he undeniably is, but I perhaps lazily thought he just worked hard, formed a great band, got label interest, signed a deal, and away he went. But as I found out, his story is a little more unique and almost unreal as to how he made headway in the music industry, and at such a young age too. It's pretty fascinating, and I think you'll enjoy it. If you want to hit Myke up and find out more about what he's working on, be sure to visit mykegray.rocks. That's Myke spelled M-Y-K-E and Gray spelled G-R-A-Y, mykegray.rocks, where you can find all the info about Shades of Grey and support everything Myke is doing. You'll hear from this chat how passionate and focused Myke is as both a musician and a person, and it was a lot of fun talking to him and hearing his story. Hope you enjoy this. Thanks again for choosing the Straight to Video podcast, and now sit back and enjoy my chat with Myke Gray. Thank you ever so much for taking the time to do this. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. What would you like to talk about?
Well, if it's all right, I normally say people, if they're okay, to dust the cobwebs and go right back to kind of what shaped you into where you are today.
How much time have you got?
I got as much time as you want to take, mate. So you grew up in and around London, is that correct?
I did. I grew up in a council estate in Fulham. Quite a tough council estate.
Yeah, did you have to learn to fend for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up without going into too many details, I grew up in a very harsh environment, which is a large part of why I am the way that I am now. Very much so.
So was your early musical exposure, was it kind of to like the punk music of the late 70s, would you say?
Well, I was very lucky in one regard and very cursed in another. Is that because of the nature of my childhood, which was violence on an everyday occurrence. I was exposed to huge amounts of violence all the time. And so you have to find something that will help you survive. There was nothing that was coming from my family because a large part of the violence was coming from my family. So I had to find something within myself. And as long as I can remember, there's always been sport and music. Everything I do, I'm obsessive in, but I was an obsessive footballer. And then when I finally heard music, and I was aware of music, but the first thing where it was like a lightning bolt was when I heard Pretty Vacant by the Sex Pistols. And it was unlike anything I'd ever heard. And there was just within the music, I could hear this anger and this threat, which is something that's inside me all the time. Anyone who knows me well will tell you that it's a fine line that you walk down of what one you're going to get from me, and depending on the day and depending on the circumstances, I will be more in one side than the other. And so that resonated with me. It was kind of like, wow, what is this? It was almost like it was the first time I was aware of a piece of music talking directly to me. I'd heard music and such, but all of a sudden this voice was talking to me. And then I discovered that there was all these other bands, like the Stranglers were another one, the Damned was another one, and Generation X was another. It was all punk music. And so I was kind of obsessed with music. But then my older brother, who was much, much more violent than I ever could be, he was always in prison. He had a close circle of very violent friends. And then one of these people, they would come round to my house and they would be interested in music. But there was one guy called Johnny, I won't give you his second name, and he had all of these cassettes that he wanted to sell. There was about 40 cassettes in this box. And my stepfather purchased these cassettes off him for about a tenner. And every day I would just pick up a cassette and I would put the cassette in and I would listen to all this music that I'd never heard before. And it was people like Genesis and Pink Floyd and all of this sort of what would be, I guess, considered AOR or progressive rock. And I was listening to it because I was just interested in all music. And then one day I just picked up a cassette and it had two names on that I'd never heard of before. On one side, it was Montrose, and on the other side, it was Van Halen. And I had no idea what it was, and I just used to put it in and put the headphones on. Then the introduction to Van Halen 1 came on. And this was a life-changing moment for me, because it was literally like the gods had just gone, this is for you. And that changed my life massively.
How old was you at that point then?
12 or 13, I guess. I didn't get on well with anyone. I didn't get on well with kids. I didn't get on with anyone. So it was very much isolated. Music was the only thing that was in my world. And so that was a big change. And I got a guitar at this point, but I was learning punk songs, and just learning all that sort of bar chords. But all of a sudden, this was a different thing. I was hearing something I never heard before. That was a pivotal moment.
Was you having lessons on the guitar or was you just learning by ear?
I had initially a classical guitar, but it just didn't connect with me. I just, for whatever reason, just one of those old nylon catgut things, but it just never happened. And then when I was at school, there was a kid in my class and he was a little bit out there and his name was Russell. And he came to school with a guitar one day, like an electric guitar, copy. It was a Gibson Marauder copy. And he came in and it just kind of like fascinated me. It was like, this is what I want. Why is this so different to the classical guitar? And by the end of the day, that guitar was mine. For one of whatever reason you wanted, that guitar belonged to me from that point on. And so I was strumming away on this guitar. And then obviously the Van Halen thing came into it. But another very important part of the jigsaw was my sister used to work at a nightclub, a venue, and it was called the Zigzag Club in North London. And at the time, it was a great club. And it was actually do you remember the Bad News documentary?
Yeah.
So that club is the Zigzag Club. And my sister used to manage it. And so all the time these bands would be coming in, I just used to go down and hang around and pester every band that played. And I pestered Phil Collen from Girl, and I pestered Brian Tatler from Diamond Head, and Danny Gwilym from Chinatown. And
did you know who all these people were at the time?
You've got to bear in mind, I'm 13 years of age, and every week I would steal every music paper there was, whether it be Sounds, I would steal them from shops, and I would come home and I would be making all of these books. I'd be cutting out. So I knew the names of everyone. My level of obsession knows no bounds. I would had all these books with, just where I would be cutting out everything. And I would get pens and I would write out every band member. So I was doing rock family trees at the age of 12 and 13 of all of these bands. And so I just used to go down. And at the time, I didn't think there was anything wrong with me just walking into a band's dressing room and going, "Can I play your guitar, please?"
So good.
So why would anyone mind? But now, obviously, in hindsight, I realize it may have been a little bit precocious. But I remember just walking into girls' dressing room. And at the time, it was Phil Lewis, and Jerry Laffey wasn't there, actually. It was Phil Collin. And I just walked into the dressing room and sort of everyone looked up. And I just went, hello, can I play your guitar, please? And it was the Black Ibanez Destroyer, which he actually uses in the Photograph video. And sort of slightly taken aback, he sort of goes, yeah, this is Phil Collin. Sure. And so I just sit down and such, and he's kind of like watching, and I start playing. And he goes, oh, well, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? And he sort of showed me how to play All Night. He showed me how to play Burn by Deep Purple. And like that. Do you play guitar?
I play bass.
Okay, so you know that there's like little inversions that you can do with two fingers as opposed to do. So I was trying to play everything with bar chords. He goes, no, you got to play like this. And he sort of showed me how to do that little trick, which is the key of all the Ritchie Blackmore riffs. But it was like a little thing like that. And then one of the bands that was meant to be playing at the Zigzag Club was Bernie Tormey. And so his manager contacted the club, and my sister got kind of friendly with him. And the tour manager sort of took an interest in me. And he sort of said, oh, you should meet Bernie one day. And I'm like, yeah, sort of love to. And then he came round to my house. So this was like a huge moment in my life, because I don't know if you ever met Bernie Tormey, but he's a big guy, intimidating, wild hair. And I was a little 13-year-old, 12-year-old in a council estate, and very reclusive and very shy. And then my sister said, oh, he's here. He's downstairs. Just remember looking over the balcony in this huge like mop of blonde hair and like red and black striped trousers and winkle picker boots. And it was like, oh my God, he's coming up. And so I went into my room, and in he came. And Bernie has this huge smile, or had this huge smile. And he sort of came in. He said, I hear you're a guitar player. Do you want to play some music? And so for about 2 hours, maybe 3 hours, he was in my, bedroom showing me how to play the riff to Crazy Train and showing me how to hammer on. And then he said, would you like to come down to rehearsals one day and jam with the band? It's like, oh, wow, you got to be joking. So of course I say yes. And then about 4 weeks later, I'm now just waiting for the phone call. Tour manager says, this is the day. So I go down with my little guitar and everything. And he says, all right, sit down there. So for 2 days, I would like sit on this settee and I'd watch Bernie Tormey. And Frank Noon was the drummer, who was the original drummer of Def Leppard. And they had a bass player called Everton Williams on bass. And so I would watch the Bernie Tormey band rehearse. And so I saw professional musicians going through what you do at rehearsals. Mm-hmm. And then at the end of every set, he would go like, okay, it's your turn. And they told me in advance to learn an Alice Cooper song called Under My Wheels, which I did. And so at the end of every set, I'd get up with my guitar and I would play Under My Wheels with him. And it was like fantastic. And we'd play it a couple of times. I'd sit back down and they probably played the set maybe 4 or 5 times. And every time I'd get up. And this went on for 2 days. And then on the end of the second day, Bernie said, well, would you like to get up and jam with us at the Marquee? And so it was like, at this point, I'd never played a gig or played in front of anyone ever. But I was very determined as a person. So then the day of gig comes and, I've never even been to a gig at this point, let alone, I don't even know what a gig is, So I'm waiting backstage. And of course, it was in the old Marquee, which was on Wardour Street. And there must have been about 700 or 800 people in this room. The gig is going on and I'm backstage, like hearing this unbelievable furore that's going on and noise and cheering of the crowds. And all of a sudden it's getting closer to the point of like, oh my God, I'm going to have to go on here and play. And I remember the tour manager at the end of the set, he goes, are you ready? And I'm like, And so then Bernie comes off and, like you do at the end of the main set, he goes, okay, it's time for the encore. And so I go out and and there's like all of a sudden 700, 800 faces just turn and look at me, and then Bernie kind of introduces me and he goes, okay, start it. Something that I wasn't even expecting him to say. It was like, so I started the song and everyone played. Once something like this happens to you at the age of 12 or 13, and then you go back to school the next day, it's kind of like, nah, this ain't for me. There's only one path for me.
So was you all rocked out and ready for the gig? Did you have any rock gear at that point?
At the age of 13, I had hair down to my waist.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, I mean, once I'd made the decision of this is what I want to be, it was kind of like everyone just thought I was a little girl. I had very long hair. I was very slight built. I had all the gear. I was ready to go. I just didn't know what a gig was.
That's almost like friggin' fairy tale stuff, really.
I was very lucky.
Unreal.
I was very lucky. And then, and Phil Collin let me get up on stage, not when there was a gig on, but there was a sound check. And he let me play at sound check. And all these bands would, I just sort of just would pester them. And they just kind of like, yeah, okay, fair enough. And so I'd get up. Dave Hill from Slade, he let me play his guitar. I remember the same tour manager of Bernie Tormey, he was a very good friend of Rory Gallagher. And he took me to see Rory Gallagher at the Dominion Theatre. And then afterwards he goes, oh, would you like to meet Rory? I was like, yeah, cool. Thinking that this was kind of thing that anyone could do. So I get taken up into the dressing room and he's literally just finished the gig. And I walk into the dressing room and Sean, who was Bernie's tour manager, said, hey, Rory, this is Myke and he's a really great guitar player. And Rory Gallagher just goes, well, would you like to play my guitar? And so the legendary Strat is there, right there. And at the time, I just pick it up and start playing. And Rory Gallagher's like standing over me. He's just played a gig, and I start playing this guitar. And he goes, oh, I can see you're a real player, And he says something really complimentary, enthusiastic. And, just keep playing. You've got the gift, do it, such and such. But I got to play that Strat, but I didn't realize at the time.
Wow.
John Sykes was another one. It's like my sister's boyfriend was this lighting engineer for Thin Lizzy on the Thunder and Lightning tour.
Crazy. And
by now I think I'm about 15 or 16 maybe. I'd sort of progressed a little bit. And so my sister boyfriend, whose name was Dave, said, would you want to come down to soundcheck and meet John? I knew who John Sykes was because I was a big fan of the guitar solo on Love Potion No. 9. To my ears now, it's still one of the greatest guitar solos ever. And I heard this guitar solo and it was kind of like, I want to know how to do that. Because it was different. It was a different way of guitar playing. It's hard for me to put into words. Gary Moore is a very aggressive guitar player, but John Sykes was aggressive in a more fluid way.
Right.
And there was something about his playing which resonated with me. And even now, I still think he's one of the most fluid guitar players. And so I really wanted to meet John Sykes. And so he took me down to the Hammersmith Odeon. He just led me into the dressing room and John Sykes is in there, and the black Les Paul with the silver scratch plate is sitting right there. And so Dave comes in, he goes, hey, John, this is Myke. This is the guy I told you about. He'd love to play your guitar. And so John Sykes goes, yeah, okay, here you go. See what you think. And it was an unbelievably heavy guitar. And so he saw me play and he started to laugh. And then he goes, well, do you want to go up and play it through the amps? And so he led me onto the Hammersmith Odeon stage with his Marshalls, and I played his guitar. So when you have these things happen to you, it becomes like, well, obviously I'm not going to do anything else, You're exposed to it so young. It's a bit like Frank Lampard training with the Bournemouth youth squad when he was like 10 years of age. It's kind of, there's no other path, and it's almost like these doors were open for me to go down that path.
Oh, it's incredible. Have you crossed paths with people like Phil Collin over the years? And did you remind them, I was that kid that just walked into your dressing room?
Well, when I was playing bass for a band called Must, and we supported Def Leppard all around the UK. I mean, I'm not someone who gets intimidated easily, but I reverted back to that 12-year-old boy when Phil Collin came into the room, and I could barely speak. And it was actually another friend of mine who told him the story because I couldn't actually bring it. I couldn't do it.
So you probably had less confidence that time round than you did the first time when you just...
For sure. And so then he came and said to me, were you such and such? And I was like, yeah, that was me.
That's incredible.
Very lucky.
Did you drop out of school early because you just became consumed by guitar and it was like, screw this?
Yeah, I mean, it was an odd situation. At the end of the third year when you normally pick your options, well, to cut a long story short, there was someone who lived in my council estate who was the daughter of someone, and she was a teacher at quite a high level. And she agreed to give me homeschooling so that I didn't have to go to school, because basically what was going on, I was going to school in the morning, signing the register, going back home again, playing guitar all day, going back in the afternoon, signing the register. And this went on for some months. And at the end of my school report, one of the teachers went, I would love to grade Myke's work, but I've never actually seen him. And so I'd made the decision that I wanted to be music. My parents and my family didn't care either way. But this teacher, she agreed to sign the forms that she would homeschool me. But after about 2 weeks, she just went, oh, you know what you're doing. Just get on with it. And so I didn't go to school after that, ever. I didn't get a single qualification, nothing at all.
Wow, it was just guitar all the way from there.
It was basically that way until Skin split up. I think it was in 1999. And then I became a session musician and stuff like that. Then I had to go back to school to get all of my qualifications to be what I do for a living, which is nutritionist, personal trainer, and all these other things. So I did go, but I just went back later down the line.
I was going to ask about how it was when you was old enough to go to clubs and venues and things like that, but obviously you did it when you was like super young.
Something else happened then. My sister became girlfriend of an A&R guy at Chrysalis Records. And so then I got taken to everything. So then I was literally at the Hammersmith Odeon all the time. So whether it be Whitesnake on the Come and Get It tour, the Scorpions on the Blackout tour, I was at the Hammersmith Odeon all the time. Then I learned how to sneak into the Hammersmith Odeon and basically watch the sound checks. And one of the ones that I will never forget is Bernie Tormey's drummer. He went on to play in a band called Wasted. And they were supporting, I think it was Dio. And I snuck into the Hammersmith Odeon to watch the Dio soundcheck on the first Dio solo tour. And I had never heard, this was another epiphanal moment, was hearing Ronnie James Dio sing, because you hear music and everything. And then I'd snuck into the sound check and I'm like it has 2 levels. So I snuck into the back. And so my little trick was to hide in the top part, and no one was really bothered at that sort of time. And I was kind of small, so I could sneak under the seats, and so no one would know that I was there. And so I remember sneaking in, and I was watching the band come in, and then they sound checked with Neon Nights. And of course, this voice came, and it was kind of like, it was like, oh my God. It was like, if I'm going to be famous, I've got to get one of those.
Right, okay.
And so there was like a little click in my head, which when all of a sudden it changed from, because at the time it was just guitar. And then watching Ronnie Dio at Soundcheck made me realize I need a singer. If I'm gonna succeed, I've got to align myself to a singer, and it's got to be a singer like that.
I've heard you speak about like the priority of working with such formidable singers before, so that kind of makes sense now.
Yeah, it was just something that switched in my head. It was kind of like, unless you've got one of these, don't bother, So it was kind of like, and hence I sought out singers like Neville McDonald's and such, because they're very few and far between. There's lots of people that can sing a little bit, but to sing like Ian Gillan or to sing like Paul Rodgers or Ronnie Dio, there's not many. You maybe get, at the moment, I guess there's Lizzie Howe and there's the guy Dino Jadusik. They're very few and far between. If you get 2 or 3 a year, you're lucky. You're lucky.
Because you played in a band with a friend of mine, Phil Connolly.
Yeah, lovely guy.
We did a tour with Phil going back, crikey. I was going to say a few years ago, but it's probably over 10 years ago now when $1 Million Reload were first starting. So that's a long time ago. But he's got one of those like larger than life voices.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with Phil, when I got asked to play Download, I didn't know whether I was going to do an instrumental set or back catalogue set. And so Andy Copping said, well, do whatever you want. And so then I thought, well, and to be fair, when you work with people like Neville McDonald and you work with Mattia Alfonsetti, you write for their capabilities, which is not the capabilities of most people. You only have to try singing Tower of Strength, and then you'll suddenly realize how hard it is. Try singing Wings of an Angel, and you realize it's a small list, And so Phil, to his credit, he kind of when, I'll have a go, I'll come and I can have a go at this, and he did a great job. They're not the easiest songs in the world to sing. And he came in, he did a couple of days rehearsal, he belted it out and everyone had a great time, so fair play to him. A couple of singers didn't have, they tried it and then they realized they couldn't. And, and Phil did a great job.
Prior to Jagged Edge and stuff like that, what was the bands in between that point? Once you realised you needed the singer and it's like, right, I need to get this whole unit around me.
That's a long story as well. I started to become known on the scene as this arrogant, precocious young guitar player. And I got asked by UFO to play for them. And we did one show at the Astoria, which is in London. And so I think I was 18 or 17 or 18. And I got the phone call to, would you like to play for UFO? And it was like Michael Schenker was one of my heroes, one of my three. There was Eddie Van Halen, there was Randy Rhoads, and there was Michael Schenker. And those were the three gods. And so I said, yeah, of course I'll do it. I'd be not more nervous about doing it now than I was then. At the time, it just seemed like it was a natural progression for me. So we went out to Woolwich. They were rehearsing at a place called Tasco, which was owned by this guy called Joe Brown. And so we did the rehearsals there. He'd done all the lights for UFO through the years. And so he was there on board and I was there rehearsing. And that was another moment, because you learn all the songs, and you're playing along to them to your records. And then you get to rehearsals. And the rehearsals was Paul Gray on bass, who was in The Damned, and he was in UFO, Jim Simpson on drums. And we start rehearsing as a three-piece, and you're playing the songs. And then Phil turns up a little bit later and he sort of goes like, well, what shall we start with? And I just went, Lights Out. And so we start, the first song I played with UFO was Lights Out. And so it starts, dun, 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 and he's like, oh yeah, this is rocking. And then he sung the opening line. And it was another one of those, it was like, wow, because that was a big difference. Watching Ronnie Dio at soundcheck is very different to standing next to Phil Mogg and hearing him sing Lights Out. And he sung it amazing, because he has one of these deep, resonant voices, brilliant diction, just total clarity. And all of a sudden, I'd played in loads of bands prior to that. And then you realize in your head, everything I've played with is shit right up to this moment. Everything I've done prior to this is nothing. It means nothing, because all of a sudden I'm working with a fantastic songwriter and a fantastic singer. So it was almost like a button that just went, right, now we start again. And then you're rehearsing for a couple of days, and then the gig came, and it was a big gig. It was, Astoria Theatre. There was a couple of thousand people in there. You do the gig. And I got some good reviews from that. But most importantly, Joe Brown saw me rehearsing with UFO. And he sort of went, this kid knows what he's going places. And so he then asked to be my manager. And so then he come on board as my manager. And then he got Rod Smallwood involved.
I was wondering how you hooked up with Rod, because I know he's been a big part of the whole journey.
Joe was trying to get he was trying to get the lights. He had the first computerized lights. They were called Very Lights, where you could pinpoint something on the computer and all the lights would go to one place. And at the time, this was a big deal, and every band wanted to use it. And he kind of had the best technology. So Deep Purple was in, and Judas Priest was in, and I would be in, like, watching these bands rehearse. And so I was always around it. And he was trying to get Iron Maiden on board. And so he brought Rod Smallwood down to see the lights. Somehow, Joe got Rod on board. He goes, well, I'm managing Myke and we're going to do this. And we're going to put them on tour with Ozzy Osbourne if we can get a band soon enough. And so then it became full steam ahead. And Sanctuary, Rod Smallwood, was behind the getting of the first real lineup of Jagged Edge. The lineup that had Rod Armitage on vocals, who was in Accept for a while, and Baby Cuckoo. There was a bass player and the drummer, and we went out on tour with Ozzy Osbourne.
I mean, that's crazy. I mean, before any kind of essentially record deal or recording, you was out on a big support tour. That's amazing again.
Yeah, it was. And it was just another, at the time, it all seemed completely natural, because in my head, I'm thinking, this is my natural path. I'm going to be a rock star. This is what I should be doing. So there was never any doubt in my head. It was because I was so tunnel vision. And people who know me will tell you if I decide to do something, it's tunnel vision. And I decided to be a rock star. So it just seemed very, very natural. And if you work with me, you know it's an all-day thing. It's not like you're going to get a couple of hours or you're going to get me for a few days where I'm going to be interested. You get me from the moment I wake up to the moment I sleep. And people who are serious, they see this and they realize this kid is not going to give up for anything. Nothing is going to stop him. No singers are going to stop him. No band members are going to stop him. It will be relentless. And it's been like that way my whole life. And so Rod, if you've ever met Rod Smallwood, he's one of the most formidable, intimidating, and ferocious human beings you will ever encounter. He'll headbutt someone, he'll punch someone, he'll throw someone down the stairs. You know, this is not someone that you ever fuck around with. And he decided that he wanted to manage me because I fitted into his thing. So we got this band together and we went out on tour. And then it transpired that Joe Brown, what he told Sharon Osbourne was that Sharon was going to get the PA and lights for free in order for Jagged Edge to support. But if we got a record deal, then we would have to compensate Joe Brown with the cost of the PA and lights of what it would have given Sharon. Rod Smallwood, upon hearing this, went, no. That's not going to happen. So Rod basically went, you got a choice. You can go with Joe or you can come with me. Easy decision. So we went with Rod, and Joe Brown then impounded all of our equipment. So we couldn't finish the last few dates of the tour, you know, so we had to get a judge involved to get our equipment back. Now, as that was all going on, at that particular time, I didn't drink, I didn't do any drugs, and all I did was play music. And anything that deviated from that was a weakness. So if you're drinking or you're taking drugs, then you can't be very serious. And then it transpired that certain members of the band that was in Jagged Edge at the time was doing that. So that was like, well, game over, you're done. That's what I didn't think that serious musicians did. Broke that band up because we weren't going to get a record deal. That exact time, we were contacted by Polydor Records and said, we know that this is the conversation to Rod Smallwood. We know that you've got this guitar player and we've got this singer called Matty Alfonsetti. And if you get these two people together, we will give you a record deal. And so Matty came over with his manager. We had a very brief discussion and it was like, okay, let's give it a go. We need a song. Polydor wanted to hear something to know that it was going to work. So I'd written this song and we went into Battery Studios and Chris Tangarides produced this one track. We demoed it on a weekend. I think we went in on a Friday, finished it on a Saturday night. On Monday morning, we had a record deal.
It's so crazy. The whole story is nuts, man.
All of it. And then, so we got a record deal. Then it was kind of like, all right, I guess we got to write some songs. Then it turned out that we had to pay off Matty's manager. And I think he got like this 10 grand payoff for Matty then to come over to Sanctuary. Then we get put into the Columbia Hotel, which is a very famous rock and roll hotel on Bayswater. And so I pitch up with my guitar. We go into Matty's hotel room and it was like, okay, write some songs. And literally the first song that we wrote was You Don't Love Me. Kind of like, what do we do? And it's kind of like, well, I've got this riff. And he goes, well, I can sing something like this over that. Then I sort of went, well, if you're going to sing that, then we can do this bridge. And then he goes, well, then we can do the chorus. The song was written in about 30 minutes. And it's still being played 30 years later.
Crazy. So when, let's say, this formation of Jagged Edge began, the whole US hard rock explosion was really happening, coming over to the UK. Def Leppard had obviously achieved great success state-wise. As a British act, was that something you was excited to and wanted to be a part of?
Well, the thing with Jagged Edge, we got this band together and we made what we thought was a good album. But the UK press hated us. You know, they absolutely tore us apart. Now, because we had Polydor, which was a very powerful record label, and we had the most powerful manager in the world at the time, even possibly still, we would get access to all of these tours. And, you know, we would have full-page adverts in Kerrang and Raw and all these magazines. We went on tour with Bruce Dickinson. We went on tour with Thunder. We went on tour with Vixen. We went on tour with Dan Reed. You know, we were always out and touring, but the press hated us.
Even the rock press?
Yeah, particularly the rock press.
Wow. They
absolutely destroyed us. So they were never keen on us. If you ever go back into like when that album came out, when you look at the press, I mean, they destroyed us. They gave us no mercy whatsoever. So we did all of this The guy who signed us was a guy called David Munns, and he was the head of Polydor Records. And he was big mates with Rod Smallwood, and so he was into the band. But then when David left and Polydor was taken over by someone called Jimmy Devlin, and Little Angels and The Almighty and Jagged Edge were all signed to Polydor Records, we'd had huge amounts of money spent on all of us. All of us were unrecouped. They had to make a sacrifice.
Did all three of you ever go out on tour at the same time? That would seem like an amazing, nice package deal for the label.
No, we didn't at that time. I went on tour with Little Angels twice, but that was in Skin. And I went on tour with Ricky when I supported Def Leppard, and he was the opening act. So I have toured with them, but you're right. They should have put that bill together at the time, but it didn't happen.
I can understand it'd be kind of tough for a record label to give equal amounts of time to each band of a similar kind of ilk, if you like. But yeah, just throw them all out on tour at the same time.
Yeah, for sure. So the UK press hated us, but Out in the Cold, which was a song on the Jagged Edge album, it actually picked up a lot of radio play in the US. And we went over there to do radio promotion. The US press liked us much more than the UK press. But obviously, we didn't have the record company was not prepared to financially send us over to the US and do touring.
Did I read you actually mixed the first album out in Los Angeles? Is that right?
That was one of my first visits to Los Angeles. I'd been to New York before, but I think it was my first trip to LA. And so we got Paul Larney to mix the album, and he'd mixed Enough's Enough album and Black Velvet by Alana Miles. And so we went over to this studio, and it was the same studio that the Extreme second album was mixed in.
Wow.
And all of Nuno Betancourt's equipment was in the studio. And he actually came in one day to pick up some gear, but I had no idea who he was at the time. Just one of those mad stories. Yeah, so it was a great time, and I loved going to America because they just embraced rock music in a way that you just didn't encounter. You know, rock music in the US is ingrained into its culture. Mm-hmm. You know, it's very different to here. You know, you walk into a supermarket in Los Angeles and you're going to hear Van Halen. Yeah. You're going to hear Rat. You're going to hear Whitesnake. You walk into a supermarket here, you know, it's very unlikely that you're going to get that. Yeah. So rock music is the foundation of American music. And so it was great. I loved it. And it just made me want to go. I want to be here all the time.
When you was out there mixing in LA, was you able to take in any of the Sunset Strip scene or any of the clubs? Or was it literally get in, do the work and come back out?
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing is like both Matty and I went over to mix the album. But Matty went back after a few days because he was missing his girlfriend. You know, rather than mix your album, what's your priorities here? Mix your debut album or be with your girlfriend? So I was out there by myself. And so, yeah, I did as much as I could. I'm not the kind of person who likes to be in crowds or sort of thing. So I did as much as my personality would allow.
Yeah. One story I remember about you guys, you got the last minute call to support David Lee Roth on his UK tour after Warrant dropped out.
That's right.
Do you remember that call, and how easy was it to pull everything together at last minute? Do you remember anything about that?
Yeah, because we were on tour a lot, it wasn't hard to do. You know, we were ready to go because we'd done so many tours. We got the call that Janie Lane had broken his leg. And we did the shows with David Lee Roth, which were great because they were huge shows. Mm-hmm. I remember the one up in Scotland, did one in Peterborough. And then we get asked to do the European tour. You know, fantastic, but not the Scandinavian leg. We were going to join in Belgium. So they were doing about 4 shows in Scandinavia, and then another band was supporting them there. And so we all get on a ferry, go over to Belgium. We go to the venue, we see all the big buses and our tour bus is there. That's going to be our tour bus for the next 3 or 4 weeks while we go around Europe with David Lee Roth. And then we wake up in the morning to be told you're not on the tour. It was like, what? But we're here, you know? And apparently David Lee Roth decided that he wanted the band that supported them in Scandinavia to do the rest of the tour because he liked the singer from the support band. And so we got kicked off of that.
Oh, man.
Yeah, that was extremely disappointing.
Especially for you as like being a Van Halen fan.
gutting. I mean, over the years, you're going to get things like this happen. But that was the first time where you just went, I can't believe this.
Yeah.
Because they were big venues around Europe, big shows.
I saw the Birmingham show, and it was like one of the last big rock tours of the early 90s.
Yeah, all of that stuff, and we got to see Greg Bissonette play drums every night. It was killer stuff.
Was it Joe Holmes on guitar who went on to play for Ozzy at that point?
Absolutely. Very nice guy.
Yeah, very cool. So when Jagged Edge disbanded and you began Skin, did you have a particular vision for that band, and were you noticing changes in the music industry, like sonically? Because you guys still managed to kind of ride that wave to have a successful run right through to the mid to late 90s, really.
Well, when Jagged Edge formed, it all started out fantastic. It was like record deal. But as time wore on, the relationship between Matty and myself, we're two very strong personalities. We both are capable of writing songs by ourselves, and neither would give way to the other because both of us thought we were right about everything. And if you know my personality well, once you cross the line, there's no going back. If you let me down once, there's no forgiveness ever. And that line had been crossed. And so I'd actually wanted to get Neville McDonald to be the singer of Jagged Edge, but he wouldn't leave the band that he was in, Cougar, because it was his band, and if you're in a band with me, it's not your band.
Was he aware of that? Did he know that?
Well, I mean, it becomes very, as you're talking to me now, I'm just used to leading.
That's fine. I'm good at listening.
I'm just used to taking control, and especially when it comes to writing songs, and it's always been that way. But Nev wouldn't leave Cougar, and I wouldn't join Cougar because he asked me to do that, and we actually do some demos, and they had a keyboard player, and it's kind of like, no, this is not going to work. If you're going to have me in the band, the guitar is going to be the main thing, and the keyboards will be a secondary thing. And so that wasn't going to work. So anyway, Jagged Edge falls apart. Cougar doesn't amount to anything. I then reach out to Nev again while I'm still actually in Jagged Edge. It's just kind of like, because I can always foresee these things sort of happening. And I sort of said to him, Nev, how do you feel about giving it another go? And he was agreeable this time. So at the end of Jagged Edge, I was already writing songs with Neville McDonald and putting this together. And so that kind of came together. And then when we were finally dropped by Polydor, it was a little bit of a relief because Matty just went back to Sweden because there was no more money involved. So we didn't have to have that sort of big discussion. It was just a natural progression. Yeah. Rod only wanted to manage me. He didn't want to manage Matty. And so it was now about putting Skin together. So I go through the second process of putting Skin together.
Very cool. So did you see any kind of change in the music industry, like sonically? Did that ever bother you at the time, like in the early 90s?
One of the things that we were very conscious of, because Jagged Edge was hated so much, we had to keep Skin like a little bit of a secret. So at the time, we weren't even called Skin. We were called Phoenix, and we were called Taste, another time Obsession. And we did these little tours. And Andrew Pryor, who was the head of Parlophone, he was friends with Rod Smallwood. Once again, this industry is all about who you know. And we had just enough money to do one demo, a few days rehearsal, and a 10-date UK tour. And so we went around the UK just on the back of Jagged Edge success. And we were only playing to about maybe 50 people a night at various rock clubs. And Andrew Pryor came to a show, I think it was in Wokingham, or it could have been Reading. It wasn't a London show. And he came in and he watched us play. And Neville was one of the greatest singers in the world. It's not up for question. He's one of the greatest singers in the world. I've been on tour with him, with Thunder, with Whitesnake, and Neville holds his own against anyone in the world. So for me, it was just completely logical that you would give a record deal because he was on fire back then. He looked amazing, he sung amazing. And we had Look But Don't Touch in the set, and we had House of Love in the set. So to me, it was just completely logical that you would give us a record deal. And they did. Now, then we get taken out to Los Angeles and we record the album with Keith Olsen. And then it came to the question of how do we market Skin? At this time, no one really knew who we were. And Andy Copping who at the time he was running ACP, which is like the middleman between record companies and rock DJs around the country. You would give all of your promotional stuff to Andy Copping, and he would distribute it out. And he said, you must not mention Jagged Edge with this band. Just call it Skin, send it out to the DJs, and then see what comes back. And so we sent Look But Don't Touch out to all the rock DJs. And obviously it became like a huge success, and all the rock clubs were playing it, but no one knew who we were. And so Andy Copping is very much responsible for introducing Skin as a brand without any of the baggage that came with Jagged Edge. And so then they had to give us like a little bit of a second chance, which they did at the beginning. And then our first tour was with Little Angels.
I'm totally on board with that whole thought process, because I can remember I was familiar with Jagged Edge, but when Skin came out, I had no indication of the connection between the two. I just remember seeing posters in Way Ahead in Nottingham, and it was like, who's this band? This brand new young band that are coming out. It was great.
Even in the first video, I tied my hair back, I put a headband, I put glasses on, I grew a goatee, and it was like to present it in a completely different way from Jagged Edge, so that people wouldn't realize that I was in both projects.
How did that feel for you then? Because, I mean, as far as I'm aware, Skin was acknowledged and recognized with positivity from the rock press. Was that a bit of a relief for you?
Not really.
No?
No, I mean, if you think about it, if you remember, like Kerrang, they had that comic strip called Pandora Peroxide. And they would go out of their way to slag us off. We were never... I don't think any band that I've ever been associated with has ever been loved by the press. I think it probably largely because of my personality, it's probably a little bit too forceful for people, I guess. And so some people will call it arrogance, some people will call it confidence, some people, who knows? But there's always been a certain amount of friction. We were never loved like the Almighty. We were never loved by like thunder. We were always, they never really took us seriously.
Well, let's flip that then. It said if the press didn't like it, obviously the fan base did.
Yeah.
You was very well loved. I mean, I saw endless Skin shows from Rock City to seeing you at Donington.
I mean, we had amazing fans, and it was literally the fans kept us going. The Donington Monsters of Rock appearance, that was a huge moment for us. Because at that time, we'd released a couple of singles. The album had just come out, but it was doing it was just building. And then we went out and played at Monsters of Rock. And remember when we went on stage, I mean, there was a lot of people there. But by the end of the first song, thousands, and we just saw them coming over. The way that Monsters of Rock was kind of laid out was the main stage was farther away, and you had to go over this hill and then come down to the second stage.
That was the first year they did that as well, I think.
It was, and it was just like something from Braveheart. You just saw like this army of people coming over, the energy that they brought with them, and the band just kind of, and Neville's the kind of singer that the more people he is in front of, he's very much more comfortable live than in the studio, unlike Matty. Matty's much more comfortable in the studio, not so comfortable live. But Nev, you give him an audience, he ups his game, and he did his magic, and that appearance very much kicked us off for everything else. There's certain times where you have to deliver, and on that day we sort of did a good job.
Was it Biohazard you followed?
Yeah, there was Biohazard, was on before us.
Yeah,
I think so. Yeah,
that was a great day because you had Terrorvision and the Wild Arts as well. I mean, that's like a main stage lineup right there.
Absolutely, and Cry of Love I think played.
Yeah,
a band called Head Swim.
Yeah,
it was a great day. It was a great day. When you look back on your life, you just think I was there.
Did you get to run into Nuno Bettencourt properly that day?
No.
We
were shooting a video for Tower of Strength that day, so that was also going on. I'm so focused on what I'm doing. I always say just imagine Roy Keane on the day of a cup final. He's not going to be interested in anything other than his game. And then you've got an idea of what I'm like.
So kind of to bring things to a close and perhaps full circle, some things you've mentioned today I've read in interviews, you've considered yourself to be very headstrong, very tunnel vision, whereas I think a lot of the stuff you put out on social media today, it's perhaps a little bit different to that. It's very incredibly humble and knowledgeable, and you obviously care a lot about the musicians you perform with. Was there a turning point during your career when that became clear as to how important that was and not just so focused on, let's say, yourself? And would you maybe take the young Myke Gray into a corner and say, hey kid, listen up here?
No, I mean, because the Myke Gray in my younger years got onto Top of the Pops, played at Download, toured with Ozzy Osbourne, played at the Marquee at 13, played in UFO, did all of these things. But there has been a very pivotal moment in my life. At the end of Skin, I started to take cocaine. So someone up until that point never even had a drink. Completely disciplined, did martial arts, and a very, very focused human being. And so things like alcohol and drugs in my head were signs of weakness. This is only something that weak people would do, and this is how I've always kind of seen it. And then I fell into a crowd of people where this was going on. And so for a period of 3 years, I fell into a lifestyle which was completely alien to everything I'd ever done before. And as a result of that, I did stuff with Courtney Love, and I was doing a load of music that I didn't enjoy, that I didn't like. And so I quit music and I went into the world of personal training, and I've become a martial art instructor, a nutritionist. And for 20 years, I have done that for a living. And my clientele tend to be incredibly driven and successful people within the financial world, whether they be the CEO of Barclays or hedge funds or private equity, and so they look to me for leadership and guidance and to take them out of pain, make them stronger, so people come to me to get better at things, whether it be nutrition or anything. Then I went into from the extreme, and I became incredibly healthy, incredibly fit. And that was the pivotal moment where I changed as a person, because I'd gone up until the point of Skin falling apart. It had always been an upward path. And then cocaine came into the world. Everything fell apart. Band fell apart. Had no money. Drug addiction is not nice. You turn into a horrible person. All of my relationships broke down. And so you go through a process of rebuilding. And martial arts was the thing that kind of put me through that rebuilding phase. And then spending 20 years with some of the most intelligent people in the world, you learn to behave yourself and conduct yourself and communicate in a certain way, because they just will not tolerate it in any other shape or form. You're talking about some of the wealthiest people in the world. They're asking you to train their children in martial arts. You're being invited into royal families' houses. It was a completely different world. And then I went back into music in 2009 with a completely different perspective of life, because I'd been out of music. My whole view on the world had changed, whether it be politically or whether it be economics or just from a financial point of view. I was no longer someone that was earning £100 a week in Skin. I was someone who was earning £100 an hour fixing somebody's back. And when you've done that for 20 years, all of a sudden you're coming into it from a much more confident and stronger foundation.
And also, did you think it helped by, say, you've been out of the industry for 20 years, you built up your own business, and you're coming back into the music industry, which has totally changed. Do you think that business logic helped you as an independent musician as well?
Yeah, so the first thing that came when Skin reformed, the first thing, and we get asked to play on the main stage at Download with Def Leppard and Whitesnake, it's kind of like, it's a big deal. Being the businessman that I am, it's kind of like, well, the most obvious thing to do is to re-release the Skin album. So then I contact Parlophone and tell them what's going on, and they're just not interested. And so I go, well, can I license the album off of you then? And they go, nah, we're not interested in it. And so I'm like, are you telling me that we cannot get new product out there on the back of us playing in front of 75,000 people? And they were like, no, can't do it. And so at that point, it was like, I'm never dealing with a record label again. One of the things that I would go back on, or speak to any young musicians, is if you're serious about music, you're talking about a 20, 30, 40-year career. So the stuff that you make at the age of 20 will still be relevant 20 years later if you're continuing to make music. I have no rights to the Jagged Edge album. I have no rights to the early Skin albums. This is nothing I have any say over. None of the artwork, none of the videos, nothing. So when I went back into the music business in 2009, I wasn't financially dependent on anyone to give me any money. It was kind of like, well, if I'm going to make an album, I'll make it myself. I'm not going to give it to you. I made the Breaking the Silence album. I financed the making of the Red, White and Blues album. So everything now, I make it myself and I own it myself, knowing that I'm going to be continuing to make music in 10, 20, 30 years. My biggest regret is that I don't own those first albums. And they go and give it to Rock Candy. They license the Skin album that they wouldn't give to me to another record label. And let me tell you, getting any information out of these people, forget it. All the publishing to my Jagged Edge songs came back to me many years ago. But if you go on a PRS website, you will still see Warner Chappell are taking the publishing. Now, I have sent them endless letters with basically going, you no longer own this. Can you please stop collecting? Can you please notify PRS that you have any claim on this? Nothing gets done. So I don't deal with these people anymore. I may not have a big audience anymore, but what's more important is that I have control of my intellectual property and that no one can tell me what I can and can't release.
I think you've said before you'd rather release something to, let's say, 1,000 people and have control over it than like 10, 20,000 people where it's out of your hands, really.
So now music for me is very much about taking control of my art, my intellectual property. I'm even now considering taking all of my stuff off of digital platforms and doing it myself because I don't trust them anymore. I don't believe that these people are accounting honestly. So my advice to musicians now would be think about your career as a 30-year thing. If you're serious, if it's just a bit of a fun with your mates and you want to go out, get laid, hang out, play a bit of rock and roll, then fine, join a cover band. You can do it all through that. If you're a writer, that your art is something that's going to be around in 20, 30 years' time, then take these steps now. Own your things now. And so that is very much behind the ethos of what I tried to relate to on social media. I remember when I was offered 3,000 euros for my solo album from a European record label. And that was to record as well. You get 3,000 and then you hand over your work forever. Forget it. Why would I do that?
It's insane, man.
For the people that are listening and understanding what I'm trying to do, when I made the solo album, my instrumental, it was very much just because I wanted to play guitar again. Within Jagged Edge and Skin, I was always, you just play to fit the song, but on my solo album, I just wanted to play all the stuff that I can play, but never really got an opportunity to do. And then Shades of Grey, which is my new band, there was a fluke again as well. I was hanging around waiting for a singer to get their act together and it was just dragging on. So I just thought, I can't wait anymore. I just want to make something. So I made the one song, I Get Up, just a bit of fun. And that was another reason why I disguised myself, because I didn't think anyone would realize it was me or anyone would listen or anyone would be interested. And then it did. It got played on Planet Rock and it got a great reaction. And out of that, that's why Shades of Grey got made. And so now, if you go to my Facebook page or my website, mykegray.rocks, you can pre-order the album and you can buy the merchandise. And whatever you buy sort of goes into the funding of the making of new music. Because in the current climate, you're absolutely reliant upon fans who want you to make music and they're prepared to come to the artist directly. If you want to help an artist or a musician, go to him directly because they're not going to get anything from a digital platform. They're not going to get anything from a record shop. Just go to them directly. And you buying a CD, just one CD makes a difference to something.
How are you finding the old Patreon thing?
It's absolutely fantastic because I have a personal library of 30 years of material. I've videoed everything. I have demos of everything. I have songs I played with UFO. I've got Jagged Edge songs. I've got Skin songs, stuff that no one's ever seen. I've got the making of the first Skin album in Los Angeles. And so what I'm doing on Patreon is giving stuff that you will not see anywhere else. So you subscribe to that. I don't do the 3-tier thing. I just do a one.
I noticed that. I thought that's quite a cool idea. It's more like a fan club, really.
I didn't like the idea of one person getting something that someone else didn't. For me, this is all about the fans, and if you buy into me and you buy into my songs and my work and what I'm trying to do with music, then you get everything. That's the way I kind of see it.
Myke, really appreciate your time, mate. It's been lovely chatting with you.
I hope I just didn't talk at you for too long.
I love it. I'm a better listener than I'm a talker, so I've loved it. It was perfect.
I know I talk a lot.
Thank you so much to Myke Gray for sharing such killer stories and making my job super, super easy. That really was a lot of fun. Don't forget to visit mykegray.rocks to pick up some great music, and also hit up and follow Myke on all his social media platforms. If I could ask a favor from you guys, please share the Straight to Video podcast with all your friends. It will really make a difference. I feel we're really building something kind of special here, so any help like that goes a long, long way. So until next time, I've been your host, Rob Lane. This has been the Straight to Video podcast, and I'll be sure to speak to you all again real soon.